In 1946, a young couple was parked in a lover's lane at around midnight when someone tapped on the driver's side window and shined a flashlight in. Naturally, the couple assumed it was just a cop. However, when they noticed what the assailant was wearing, they realized that something was horribly wrong. He appeared to be wearing some sort of white pillowcase over his head with nothing but 2 small eye holes cut out. The young man, Jimmy Hollis, cracked the window and told him,
"I think you have the wrong car."
And the assailant calmly responded with,
"I do not want to kill you, fellow, so do what I say."
The couple noticed that he was armed and figured that this was just a simple carjacking, so they decided it was best to obey him. However, as soon as they stepped out of the car, the assailant made a strange demand.
"You, take off your pants."
At this point, they realized that they had made the wrong choice, but lacking any other options, Jimmy obeyed his order once more. As soon as he removed his pants, the assailant struck Jimmy's head with his weapon. He hit him with such force that the girlfriend, Mary Larry, falsely thought he had been shot. The assailant then struck Mary next, before ordering her to stand in the middle of the road. He then uttered a single word:
"Run."
She sprinted down the road, desperately looking for anyone who could help her. Eventually, she found an old car and started frantically knocking on the windows. But when she peeked inside, there was nobody in it, and then out of nowhere, she was once again knocked down to the ground. She looked up and found the masked assailant standing over her, who would ask a confusing question.
"Why are you running?"
She responded that he told her to run, and he called her a liar before assaulting her. However, she soon quickly managed to get up and continue running down the street. After another half mile, she finally found a house and got them to call the police. Ultimately, both Jimmy and Mary survived, although this was only the first attack of many. The assailant, deemed the Phantom Killer, seemed to target young couples late at night. Even though the police had numerous interesting suspects, he was never caught.
This is one of the worst pedophiles in American history, and he was never brought to justice. Meet Frank Sheldon from northern Detroit. In the 1970s, Frank Sheldon was running a pedophile ring off of this island, North Fox Island in northern Michigan. Frank Sheldon had previously purchased the island in the 1960s, and in the 1970s he turned this island into a child porn production hotspot. You see, Frank had installed a private airstrip on the island, so he and other pedophiles would fly kids onto the island, sexually assault them on camera, and then fly them home. But after one of his co-conspirators was arrested, Frank Sheldon flew out of America and was never brought to justice. That's right, he flew to a foreign country where he started up another pedophile ring, and then he died a free man. North Fox Island was huge news at the time, but in the past few decades, nobody's really talked about it. And I wonder why. There's no justice for the children of North Fox Island, and it's still unknown how many victims there were. Hundreds, thousands, we don't know. But to me, it's disgusting that this pedophile was allowed to go free, was never caught or arrested for his crimes, and died a free man, facing no repercussions for the hundreds, if not thousands of children that he harmed.
This lady married her dead boyfriend. In 1978, in a small town in Ohio, there was a woman named Linda Smith who was head over heels in love with her boyfriend. They had talked about marriage endlessly, but just weeks before their wedding, her boyfriend tragically died in a car accident. Linda was devastated. Her boyfriend named Lemmy Leaf was the best boyfriend ever to her. One evening, Linda couldn't take it anymore and she dug up her boyfriend's grave with the help of her 2 brothers. She announced she was still going to marry him. The townspeople were baffled, and some thought grief had driven her mad. Linda planned an eerie wedding party and invited everyone, wearing a white dress beside Max's corpse in a suit. Then came the twist. Linda didn't plan on returning her boyfriend to his grave. Instead, she decided that they will live together and have a family. All her friends and family saw her as a mad woman, but she didn't care. She kept her boyfriend inside a refrigerator and would occasionally bring him out for a walk. About 11 months later, she got pregnant, but you already know how she got that child.
Our darkest moments could be weaponized against us, and in the event of today's case, could even be used to cover up murder. 22-year-old Matthew Trussler, like a lot of kids in their teens, Matthew sort of lost his way for a little while. He had battled with some substance abuse in his earlier years. So when Sean, who is his older brother, mentioned that he would be moving to Florida, Matthew thought it would be a good opportunity and a fresh start for him as well. Matthew even started thinking about settling down. He created a profile on Tinder, and eventually he came across one pretty face that caught his eye, a 24-year-old Melissa Turner. The two met up, and Melissa said she was immediately taken with Matthew. And before long, as the story goes, the couple was fully committed to one another. By 2019, the couple was engaged and looking to buy a house together. Everyone who knew them as a couple thought these two are going to go on and live a long, fruitful life together. That was until October 18th. 2019. She woke up at around 8:30 a.m. Melissa found their house a complete disaster. There was blood everywhere, and Melissa said she was calling out for Matthew, but she couldn't find him. So this is when she decides to go out into their backyard and look around. And lying on the patio was Matthew. He was unresponsive and covered in blood. So Melissa calls 911, and the operator told her to administer CPR. Melissa seemingly followed those instructions because when EMTs arrived minutes later, she was also covered in blood herself. But it was clear to Melissa that there was no one who could help the situation because her fiance, 24-year-old Matthew Trussler, was dead. So now Melissa tells police that she was home, but she has no idea what happened. She just woke up and found him in this bloody mess. And when they look inside, they find a lot of broken glass, including one piece that has a pretty good amount of blood on it. And they also discover a black switchblade that, when flipped open, also has blood on the inside blade. And there's a ridiculous amount of blood in the kitchen. They believe that Matthew probably mostly bled out inside the home and then ended up crawling out of the screen of the window out to the patio. They're like following the blood, and this is what they think has happened. So police are wondering, was he trying to get away from someone? Like, why crawl outside if no one else is in the house? Why not crawl to a phone? Because it definitely looks like he was trying to get outside. The wounds on Matthew's body become even more confusing to detectives. He has multiple lacerations all over him, but the one that looks fatal was actually a deep cut to his right arm.
Oh, interesting.
At this point, Melissa agrees to come down to the police station for questioning, and there she remains adamant that she has absolutely zero idea how this had all happened. In the interview with police, Melissa comes in still wearing those latex gloves that they gave her earlier at the crime scene, and then they're like, we need to photograph you now, so you're gonna have to remove the gloves. And so she takes the gloves off. They realize that under the gloves she was hiding a pretty big gash on her palm. They discover that that's not her only injury. She also has a cut on her neck. Police are having a hard time buying Melissa's story.
Melissa.
They were like, hey, did you guys as a couple ever fight? Did things ever get physical between you? And Melissa's like, no, absolutely not. But there was one thing. Melissa said Matthew always tried to hide from her when he was sad or depressed. But he had talked about self-harm. Is she alluding that maybe this was... The medical examiner actually finds a stab wound in his back. And the evidence that this was actually a homicide keeps growing from here in the investigation. Police collect all the data from Matthew's smartwatch and learn his exact time of death, which lines up with another really chilling piece of evidence that police had collected while canvassing the neighborhood. The people living across had a security camera. So an hour before his heart stopped beating, you can definitely hear banging coming from Matthew and Melissa's home. There is screaming. It's a woman shouting things like, I hate you, you're so effing arrogant, go effing die. All of that screaming and crashing seems to go silent by 5:11 a.m. that morning, which does again line up with the data collected from Matthew's smartwatch. So the question of is clearly no longer on the table for detectives because you can obviously hear that there is a woman threatening Matthew.
So they can clearly hear there's two different voices, a woman and a male. Okay.
Now, question is, was that a third party or is it Melissa? An hour before his heart stopped beating, you can definitely hear banging coming from Matthew and Melissa's home. So detectives go back into the interrogation room and they're like, listen, your neighbor has security footage and we need you to tell us what happened around 4 a.m. And Melissa's like, no, I was asleep. I don't remember. And detectives are like, Melissa, please. And eventually Melissa seems to recall some new details.
Interesting.
She says, well, we might have gotten into an argument, actually, yeah. But we weren't like screaming at each other. And if we were, it really wasn't a big deal. She says Matthew was still up at 4 in the morning and was being super loud and woke me up. And so we got into a fight about it. And when they asked her why she was screaming at him to get up. She says, oh, well, Matthew was clearly not sober on that evening, even though he had been battling with his sobriety for years. And when he got to that state of drunkenness, he would often fall down and have a hard time composing himself. And so then they're like, okay, whenever we're trying to ask you something, you just like revert to like somehow it's Matthew's fault. They say, okay, now can you tell us how you actually got that cut on your hand? And Melissa finally gives in and she's like, fine, I did murder Matthew, but it was in self-defense. Melissa says when Matthew woke her up at 4 a.m. because he was being too loud, it did turn into a pretty ugly argument. When Matthew got to this point of intoxication, he was also known to bring out knives. And so that evening, the two of them fought over the knife. Basically, she says she tried to take it away from Matthew when he grabbed her by the neck and started strangling her. She thought Matthew was going to kill her at that moment, and so she grabbed the knife that's now in her possession and stabbed him in the back. Gently though. So after this, she said Matthew slammed her head into the counter, and that's when she recalled vaguely stumbling back to her office where she collapsed in the chair until around 8 a.m. the next morning. And then Melissa says when she came to, she was certain Matthew was still alive because she didn't think that gentle stab wound would be fatal. But she does say, however, that this wasn't an uncommon occurrence between them, that she had lied earlier and there was a lot of physical abuse. After all, the couple did fight, especially when it came to the addiction that Matthew struggled with alcohol. Melissa actually doubles down on this story and she says Matthew saw demons, that sometimes in their relationship he would stare off into corners of the house and tell her the evil entities were watching them. So she says that when all of this happened, Melissa claims that something had switched in Matthew and that it didn't seem like she was even fighting him. As things escalated, he started talking to her in a weird voice and saying, "What's the matter, little girl? Are you scared? Because Matt's not here anymore." If you are struggling with mental health,
usually family,
to this severe of seeing demons,
usually somebody else knows.
Yes.
Usually it's not just the spouse, therapist, family, somebody.
And so they decide to speak with Matthew's friends and family next. When Matthew's brother Sean and his parents hear about his murder, they literally tell police Melissa killed him.
Holy crap.
Which is a major red flag.
No.
There's no question in their mind because they say Melissa took Maddie long before she killed him. Apparently, Matthew had gotten involved in Melissa's business, one that caused him to slip into old habits and threatened his sobriety. She would dress up like characters and then film sexually explicit content as these characters.
Okay.
And apparently, she got Matthew to star in these videos alongside her. This cam girl job actually helped her buy that home that they lived in Tampa. An ex-boyfriend of Melissa said once she started to see some real growth and success from her cosplay business, the more unhinged she became, if you will. All she thought about was how to make more and more money, and she was willing to do anything to make that happen. It did make Melissa pretty angry, according to friends and family, when Matthew got too intoxicated. They had seen her be the aggressor on more than one occasion. They think at first Matthew might have been into the idea of helping Melissa out with their cosplay stuff, but over time he might have gotten uncomfortable with it or suggested that he wanted out, and they believe that that was the conversation that might have sparked their argument on October 18th. And when police hear all of this, they seem to think it kind of makes sense too, particularly reflecting back on one thing Melissa said in that interview, and it was that Matthew claimed to be possessed by demons. Now, Melissa is a cosplay model and actress, and a lot of the stuff she does is horror and fantasy related. So they have to wonder, is this like a script for Melissa? Is she creating her own narrative here? On October 19th, 2019, Melissa is arrested for second-degree murder with a weapon, and a judge sets her bond for $500,000, and Melissa puts that home she shared with Matthew up as collateral to get out.
$500,000.
The autopsy report comes back with some interesting information. The stab wounds on Matthew's back were in fact superficial. They also discover that Matthew's blood alcohol level was astronomical. However, police never checked Melissa's blood alcohol level. Ultimately, they find that the cut to Matthew's right bicep severed an artery that led to his real cause of death, which was from blood loss. case. So on Valentine's Day 2022, it is time for a jury to decide whether Melissa acted in self-defense or not. Well, the answer to that question seemed to come with one final smoking gun. It was another piece of tape. It's from an ADT surveillance camera pointed at the couple's foyer. And you can see Matthew walking through their foyer pretty calmly. And then Melissa is trailing behind him in this footage, and she's hunched over. She looks irate. She's disheveled. She's very intoxicated. And then at 4:08 a.m., Melissa returns into frame. She's standing in the foyer, just staring at the wall. And in that clip, you can see that her right hand is covered in blood. And then Melissa turns back and walks back into the kitchen. If she's in self-defense, why would you run back towards your aggressor, the person who's trying to kill you? So after less than a week of testimony, the jury came back on February 18th, 2022 with a verdict. The 29-year-old Melissa Turner was found guilty of second-degree murder.
Good.
She was later sentenced to 20.5 years behind bars.
There has been an absolutely horrific murder this week that was live streamed on Instagram. This case is extremely disturbing, so please be warned before watching. On Friday, 12,000 people watched a Bosnian bodybuilder kill his wife on Instagram Live. 35-year-old Nermin had been abusing his wife during their marriage, and the pair had a young child. On Friday morning, he took to Instagram Live to tell his followers that they could witness a live killing. Absolutely horrifically, he turns the camera to his ex, whose face is completely covered in blood and disfigured. He calls her a derogatory name and blames her for her own death because she reported him to police. Disturbingly, you can hear the child crying in the background. He then tells his followers that he's the child's father and his ex had hidden the toddler from him for over a week and reported him to police for DV. So, in my opinion, yes, she's taking steps to keep her and her child safe from you. After shooting his wife in the head on Instagram, he then goads his followers saying, "Someone come and save the child." A police chase then began and he went on a shooting rampage. He continued to film and tells his viewers that he's killed 2 other people who actually turned out to be an innocent man and his young son. He also wounded a police officer, another man and a woman while on the run. He ended up unaliving himself on the same day.